The espresso machine hissed like a temperamental radiator as I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching rain make threads of the skyline. 34 floors up, the city felt distant and possible all at once. Tail lights blurring into ribbons, umbrellas pinwheeling along sidewalks, the faint suggestion of jazz escaping a bar across the street when the wind carried just right. My reflection in the glass wore the look I recognized from late nights and quiet mornings. Composed, attentive, a little tired in ways a dab of concealer would never fully erase. At 48, I had an understanding with my mirror. We'd learned to be honest with each other. I took my coffee back to my desk and laid out the drawings the way my father used to lay out newspaper pages. Edges aligned, corners squared, an insistence on order to keep the day from sliding off the table. He'd taught me that in architecture, a line never exists by itself. It's always in relationship to something, a load, a view, a decision. Maybe that's why the lack of relationship in my personal life had grown painfully neat. 2 years since Mark and I had signed our last document and shook hands in a courthouse corridor. We had a grace about it, or we tried, but grace and distance can be hard to tell apart in the dark. I told people I was focused on work, which was true enough to be useful and not true enough to be lonely. It was 7:59 when the elevator chimed, one of those sounds that learn to live in your bones if you'd spent as much of your life in offices as I had. A delivery cart rattled past with boxes of new VR headsets for the interns, and the receptionist, Leah, whispered my name as if we'd agreed to gossip. "He's early," she said. That afternoon reverence people gave a new CEO like a meteor passing over the building returned early that morning with more caffeine. He was supposed to arrive with a modest rollout. A town hall next week, meetings this week, handshakes and half-smiles designed to comfort. The press had called him an ethical disruptor, which sounded like a kind of contradiction until you remembered we worked in design. Contradiction is just a problem that hasn't found its clever detail yet. When I first saw him, he wasn't surrounded by handlers. He stood alone by the model of our Tidewater project, studying the tiny boardwalk that circled the imagined estuary. A dark gray suit, no tie. Rainwater still clinging to his hair. He was older than I'd expected, mid-50s probably, with the sort of quiet that made you remember to lower your own voice. People say good leaders fill a room. He didn't fill it. He pared it down to what mattered. I was turning back to my desk when the fire alarm stuttered into life. First a clicking cough, then a full-throated siren. The overhead fluorescents trembled as if they had hearts of their own. Lee's eyes shot wide. Interns pinged each other in a nervous flock. Our facilities manager, who lived for days like this, shouted something about orderly descent, but the words broke apart under the volume of the alarm. The strobe lights cheered the models into unnatural flickers, turning our carefully built neighborhoods into a storm at sea. I was 13 steps from the stairwell when a sudden surge of bodies sealed the corridor. Someone's water bottle rolled underfoot. There was a sharp cry, papers lifting, phones held high like lanterns. The scent of burnt dust, startled out of the HVAC, threaded the air. A hand found mine, not the panicked grab of a stranger, but something assured, warm, decisive. "This way," he said, and in that moment I didn't think about titles or privacy or the editorial page that had once accused me of designing for austerity. I thought about how his palm closed around mine, not with ownership, but with partnership. It was the difference between being pulled and being included. He angled us along the glass corridor that ran parallel to the main stairwell, past the boardrooms and the small lounge with 2 leather chairs where late afternoon yawns gathered. We came to the service stairs, the ones interns used when hauling samples, and started down. The alarm kept its relentless tempo, the air hot from too many bodies. Our hands stayed joined, my breath score-keeping in the pause between floors. "We haven't met," he said softly, and the absurdity of that fact in the clamor made me want to laugh. "But I know your work. Do you always introduce yourself during evacuations?" I said, and instantly worried it was snappish. The curve at his mouth suggested I wasn't wrong to be amused. "Only when it's efficient." A glance over his shoulder made our eye contact snap like a magnet. "I'm Nathan." "I know," I said, and then, "I'm Mara." We let go on the ground floor when the crowd opened like a slow door, and suddenly the rain, the cold, the neon glare of the deli across the street, the whole messy theater of the city swept up. Everyone was talking at once, as if the alarm had shaken out words that wanted somewhere to land. The building manager shouted the all clear. The sirens, resentful at being silenced, swallowed their last ring. "Faulty sensor," Lee informed us, breathy with relief. "Third time this quarter." Nathan turned toward me, rain softening the edges of his hair again, and offered that brief, almost private nod leaders have, the one that acknowledges everything without acknowledging anything. "Thank you," he said, though I had no idea what he was thanking me for. We walked back in with a different awareness. Of each other, of the building's precariousness. And it wasn't until 2 hours later, when I was sketching revisions for Tidewater's Civic Center roofline, that I realized my hand still remembered the shape of his. The day rushed downhill after that in the usual way. An afternoon review of the Riverside bids dissolved into a disagreement about massing and maintenance budgets that had me wanting to rip the blinds from their moorings. Our firm, Voss and Green, had been sliding too close to flashy for my taste, and if another board member tried to sell me on architectural Instagram, I might have put in a transfer to Bridge Design just to make a point. Nathan sat through the review as an observer, they said, but his questions, always fewer than anyone else's, found bottom in the work. I could feel our younger designers leaning toward his voice, ready to be led. At 4, he dropped by my corner of the floor. The rain had deepened from thread to sheet. He studied the Tidewater drawings the way he'd studied the model. "The roof line," he said quietly, "wants to be lighter." "I know." I looked at the angle I'd been resisting revising. "The council wants a gesture that says enduring." They hear light and think cheap, or worse, temporary. "And what do you hear?" His eyes had flecks of green that showed up like leaves when the light shifted. "I hear a promise," I said, before I could frame it as something safer. "As in, we promise to adapt." He considered that. Outside, lightning stitched the sky, and for a moment the glass of the conference room flashed with it, a film still. "I'd like you to lead the Tidewater presentation at the regional summit," he said. "Stakeholders, city reps, 2 weeks. We'll make the case for light that endures." That wasn't the board's plan, I said, and immediately regretted the reflex. I was used to being careful with invitations. "I'm aware," he said. A ghost of humor. "I'll handle the board." Then, more gently, "I'll speak to you before then. We need to talk through a few things." After he left, I stared at the space where he had been, thinking of the long, bright hallway in my 20s, where I'd said yes to every new thing without checking the cost. It wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition. Second chances don't look like the first ones. Word travels fast in offices with glass walls. By the time I stepped into the elevator at 6:30, I felt the static of speculation on my cardigan sleeves. The young ones love a story. Age doesn't rid us of that, it just hushes the volume. On the way down, the elevator hummed its quiet pre-sleep song, and I could see our reflections in the stainless steel. Tired people who carried their days in their shoulders, their eyes. When the doors slid open onto the lobby, I discovered Nathan waiting at the concierge desk, speaking quietly to the guard whose knee surgery had been the subject of the building's friendliest gossip. "Mara," he said, as if he'd been naming an element on a chart he knew well. "Do you have 10 minutes? We took them in the cafe across the street, where the music had adjusted to the hour, quieter, a little more like Rain's cousin. People frowned at laptops, reconciled with pastries. The air smelled of espresso and cinnamon. "I meant it about Tidewater," he said. "And I meant it about talking through a few things. But there's something else." I waited. Patience is architecture's first language. "Before I stepped in," he said, voice low enough the barista's nighttime playlist might keep our words from traveling, "there were rumors about Riverside. A leak, specifically. A competitor has our preliminary facade study. It's not final, but it's ours. I don't want to walk in waving suspicion like bunting. I want facts. And I want your read on the politics." I'd have preferred water to coffee then. The dryness that comes with the first shape of trouble. "We've had our share of reckless sharing," I said. "People wooed by the ego of credit. But a leak like that, intent matters. Do you think it's spite?" "I think it's fear," he said, and something in me settled in the place where rightness lives. The board is split over Riverside's direction, and the split has a way of making everything weaker than it should be. Fear metastasizes. I nodded. "I'll walk you through the characters," I said. "And I'll lead Tidewater. But I won't feed a rumor mill, Nathan. I won't be your hall monitor." His mouth softened into something like relief. "That's why I asked you," he said. "I suspect your no is as valuable as your yes." We spoke names, tendencies, the political geometry of departments. It's funny how affection grows in the shared labor of mapping dysfunction. He listened the way people do when the listening is itself an act of respect. When we ended, he glanced at my umbrella, the small black one that always reversed in a gust, and offered his, larger, steadier. My pride refused, my better sense accepted, and we crossed the street under a canopy that made a small room of us against the city. "About earlier," I said. People had already turned the fire drill into a story. They would turn our umbrella into one too. "Thanks for not letting me get clipped by Stampede Theater." He smiled and adjusted the umbrella so the rain wouldn't spot my scarf. "It's nothing." I wanted to tell him it wasn't, but language has a way of collapsing under what it can't fully hold. So we said goodnight and stepped apart, and I felt the echo of that hand, the memory it had made, like a knot under my skin that wasn't pain so much as a reminder to pay attention. The next week arranged itself into long days and longer evenings, papers like white hills on my desk, Tidewater's roofline becoming what it had wanted to be from the beginning, a gesture of shelter rather than a declaration of weight. Nathan made a point of stopping by without entourage. Often we said less than people who were trying to be seen saying something. Occasionally, he'd stand with me by the window and look at the rain like it was a kind of patience you learn, not a weather you tolerate. Once late, when most of the office had gone home to dinners and kids and shows about people who solved crimes in an hour, we stayed to rehearse the Tidewater narrative. The civic history, the flood maps from the last decade, the math that proves light, when done well, outlasts fashion. The building lights dimmed themselves in stages, and the city answered with its own brightness. We stood in the conference room's aquarium and were, for a moment, the only moving things inside. There are silences that swallow and silences that hold. That one held. He didn't move closer. I didn't either. But I felt the air between us as if it were a finely drawn line. A line that meant something in its nearness, the way a shadow can be part of a design as much as a light. "Do you miss it?" he asked finally, his voice softened by the room. "What?" "Believing, at the beginning of your career, that design could persuade the world to be kinder." I looked at his reflection in the glass and then at him. "I don't miss it," I said. "I still believe it. I just don't expect it to happen without a fight." He nodded. "That's why I came here," he said. "To make the fight worth the fatigue." We were interrupted by the freight elevator groaning in the distance, an old man clearing his throat, and the spell loosened. Even so, as I packed up my bag, I could feel it. The way care accumulates, small as dust, then suddenly heavy as certainty. We were careful not to name whatever it was our days were building. It couldn't last. These things don't, not in offices where glass invites speculation and ambition drives people to track the heat in a room with more precision than they give their drawings. 3 days before Tidewater's summit, HR sent a gentle, weaponized reminder about interpersonal boundaries. Addressing the firm at large in a memo, whose font was either elegant or severe depending on your sins. People whispered names in corners. Nathan and Mara started to sound like one word said 2 different ways. I ignored the memo the way you ignore bad street food, with caution, with bottled water, with the knowledge you might regret it later. The leak about Riverside got worse. Our competitors circulated a smear of an article through a friendly blog, framing our early study as evidence of a civic insensitivity that was laughable if it wasn't so strategically cruel. Anonymous quotes. Anonymous courage. I felt rage the way some people feel hunger, an ache you can't ignore. Nathan called me into his office, a room with views tight and wide, and told me carefully that the board would pursue an internal inquiry and that he needed my help to frame a narrative for the press if we had to respond sooner than later. We sat shoulder to shoulder at the small round table, a laptop between us like a campfire. His sleeve brushed mine. The contact was nothing the cameras could see, and everything my pulse could. I thought about what I'd sworn off after the divorce. The drama of compatibility, the nervous system theater of it, the way it hijacks the part of your brain that knows better. But this didn't feel like an old mistake trying to wear a new shirt. This felt like a choice I hadn't had the courage to imagine yet. "Tell me what you need from me," I said. "Your clarity," he said, "and your refusal to be manipulated by panic." "Is that a line you use often?" He shook his head, the smallest laugh. "I'm not very good at lines." That night I stayed late alone to finish the Tidewater pacing. When I finally left, the lobby was a dim aquarium again, and the security guard with the knees shook his head at the weather, as if it were a character he couldn't improve. The elevator hummed its tired lullaby. On the ride down, I pressed my fingers briefly against the wrist where Nathan's hand had held me a week earlier, the way you touch a bruise, to understand it. The next morning began with thunder stacked like plates, the city throwing tantrums against the windows. Half the office was late, which is why I noticed, almost immediately, that the box of VR headsets by the printer was gone. A small detail, stupid really, until I remembered the intern project that used those headsets to show clients fly-throughs. The presentation files had been loaded on them. Any one of us could have accessed those files remotely. The hallway rumors felt suddenly less like weather and more like a pattern. At 9, the building performed a kind of repetition. The alarm stuttered, blinked, then committed. People groaned, imitation pain, but moved toward the stairs. The facilities manager waved a clipboard like a truce flag. I reached the glass corridor and paused. A huddle in Nathan's office, gestures sharp as exclamation points. A moment later, he stepped out, saw me, and there it was again, his hand open, extended, not assuming, only offering. I took it. It wasn't symbolism that made me want to. It was survival. We moved with the tide. At the turn of the stairwell, a cluster of junior designers froze. One of them, Josh, white-faced, fingers twitchy with guilt the body couldn't hide. I didn't know yet why I thought guilt. I just knew the look of it, that thin glaze on the eyes. "Everyone keep moving," Nathan said to the group, steady as a metronome. "We'll be fine." On the sidewalk again, rain rising from the street in a scent like pennies. I watched Nathan make a phone call in a tone I wished I had for my own emergencies. Low, exact, compassionate without decoration. He came back with a look that told me our rehearsal period was over. "It's not a sensor this time," he said. "Minor fire in the server closet, no injuries. But we'll be out here a bit while they sort it. Walk with me?" We circled the block, umbrellas tilting like different philosophies. I wanted to say too much or nothing at all. He saved me the trouble. "This is going to get loud," he said. "The board, the press. We'll do what we do, work the problem. But I need to tell you something first, before the noise decides for us." My heart did an adolescent thing. I thought it had retired. "All right," I said. He took a breath the way people do before a jump they've measured 3 times. "I didn't come here to chase a scandal. I came because I believe this firm can be what it was meant to be. And I didn't plan for you. But you have been the truest thing about these 2 weeks. And if we let the office tell us who we are to each other, we will regret it. I want to be respectful, and I want to be brave." The rain softened as if it wanted to hear. I felt the world tilt. The click when something that was almost true becomes simply true. "You're my boss," I said, because reality deserves at least one line read. "I am," he said. He met my eyes without trying to win anything from them. "Which complicates me. And I won't put you in a position where your reputation is used as a cudgel. If the right choice is distance, say the word. I will not ask again." The mensch quality that people who'd worked with him had described. There it was, not as posture but as instinct. I understood then that longing wasn't the only thing under our careful silences. There was a moral center that made desire feel like a direction rather than a hazard. "I don't want distance," I said, and the relief of saying it landed in my chest with a thud I didn't mind carrying. "But I want to move like adults. Slowly, with respect." He nodded, a breath that might have been a laugh unspooling. "That's exactly how I do everything," he said. "Painfully slowly, respectfully." "You grabbed my hand pretty fast," I said, and we both smiled like people who'd seen themselves in a reflection they liked. The crisis did get loud. The blog post multiplied into a handful of articles that chewed on fabrication as if it were meat. A local news segment with graphics that made our preliminary study look like a villain's lair from a comic book. HR escalated their memos. Board members practiced their pained expressions in glass. An IT report, quiet, direct, showed that the Riverside files had been accessed remotely by a device registered to Josh. The board, finding that scandal had failed to turn into a meal, distributed platitudes about learning opportunities. HR issued a final memo about professional boundaries, which we both read and silently agreed to interpret as an encouragement to be explicit with our choices rather than coy. We told HR, privately and formally, that we were seeing each other, that we were taking steps to avoid reporting lines entanglement. The conversation was so painfully adult, It almost made me nostalgic for poor decisions suffered when the stakes were lower and the skin more elastic. We eased into weekends like two people who had remembered how to make room. We walked the river he ran along, where dogs walked their owners and tourists realized the city had more trees than they'd expected. We talked in paragraph and silence. We learned the contours of each other's ordinary. He cooked with the precision of a man who reads instructions, not because he's afraid of improvising, but because he honors the work that got the recipe written. I drew while he chopped, and sometimes he'd put down the knife, come behind me, and rest his hands on my shoulders, the weight of the day lifting as if he'd cut it thin and seared it to something easier to chew. There were moments, always small, always freighted, when the office tried to reclaim its right to define us. A colleague's lingering gaze in a meeting, a junior designer's joke that didn't quite stay in the air long enough to be harmless. Once, the old elevator stalled between floors for a 6 count, and in that breathless pause, his fingers brushed mine where they hung at our sides, our eyes meeting in the stainless steel that held our reflections like truth we weren't afraid to see. When the elevator resumed with a sigh, we were both a little different versions of ourselves. Not because anything had happened, but because we'd told ourselves the same story at the same time. Choice, not chance. We had one hard night. They arrive like weather in any long conversation. He'd taken a call from a journalist who wanted a whisper to season her article about corporate romances in the #MeToo era. Her tone as friendly as a knife. He refused her the oxygen she wanted, hung up, and stood by my window with a look I recognized and loved. Anger restrained by principle. "They'll make us an example," he said. "We'll make ourselves one," I answered. "Of care." He exhaled, tension folding into a kind of tired acceptance. "You make it sound so reasonable." "It is," I said. "Reasonable isn't a synonym for weak." He came to me then with something like gratitude and rested his forehead against mine, and the day folded away until there was just breath and warmth and the sense of a night waiting to carry what we couldn't find language for yet. The city lights made their case to the clouds. The hum of the building quieted as if we'd turned down a dimmer switch in our own ribs. The night faded around us, leaving only breath and promise. Months later, Tidewater stood framed, then skinned, then alive enough to be mistaken for the thing it had wanted to be. We visited the site and watched the light shift across the roofline like a kind of daily blessing. A councilwoman recognized me, called me the roofline whisperer, which made me laugh in a way Nathan later said was the happiest sound in his month. Riverside limped from scandal to purpose with our new narrative in place. The young designers grew into their hunger without needing to feed it with theft. Josh, I heard, had found a place in a nonprofit that taught teenagers to build furniture. The world has a way of repurposing us if we let it. We didn't rush. There were weeks when work demanded our attention like a child tugging at a sleeve. We gave it what it needed, and then we gave ourselves what we needed. We kept our hands to ourselves in meetings, our smiles measured, and then we'd catch the elevator alone at 7:45 and let the quiet hold our plans. We didn't hide because we weren't ashamed. We were simply private. There's a difference I wish I'd learned sooner. On the evening we signed the final approvals for Tidewater's public plaza, benches curved like the idea of welcome, native grasses that whispered to people about endurance. We stayed late with a small team to toast with paper cups of flat champagne. The office lights dimmed one by one, as if the building were blinking itself to sleep. People trickled out with jackets and yawns. The jazz from the cafe across the street drifted companionably through an open service door. "Walk?" he asked, and I nodded. The air had a hint of autumn cider in it, Imagined or real, I didn't care. We moved through the lobby like part of the building's last breath and stepped outside into a city that had decided to be kind for an evening. No rain, no alarms, just our steps and the hush that follows work well done. We crossed where the street shone with old light. He took my hand not with urgency, but with the confidence of a man who had chosen and been chosen back. The warmth told me as much as anything we'd ever said. We reached the little park that tucked itself between our building and the hotel with the unreasonably aggressive doorman. We sat on a bench and watched the elevator lights wink above us in constellations only office workers chart. He told me a story about his niece scoring her first goal. I told him about my father straightening newspaper edges, about the odd comfort of orderly things. "Do you ever think about the morning of the fire drill?" he asked, after the story settled. "I remember the smell of burnt dust," I said. "I remember your hand." He nodded, thumb tracing my knuckles, an old wordless reassurance. "I remember," he said. "How easy it was to choose." Easy. The word landed like a conclusion to an argument I hadn't realized I was still making with myself. Not everything needed to be hard to be worth it. Some roads were simply new to your feet. We returned to the building with the easy quiet of people who have earned the rest of the night. At the elevator, we stood side by side, our reflections gentle, our faces set in ways I trusted. As the doors slid closed, he reached for the button for 34, and his other hand found mine as if it lived there. The elevator hummed its faithful hum, and the city waited below like an old friend who knows when to keep a confidence. I used to measure days by drawings completed, emails answered, the incremental forward of projects that would live longer than any of us. I still do. But I've learned to measure too by smaller things. The warmth of a hand offered without demand, the scent of rain that promises a new season, the way a quiet breath between two people can be the bravest choice in the room. For all our talk of lines and loads and weight, what holds us up, in the end, are the details. A roof that looks like light made permanent. A roomer face down with the steadiness of two grown-ups. An alarm that teaches you who you'll reach for without thinking. The office lights dimmed, and we let them. The city glowed, and we didn't rush to join it. In the glass of the elevator doors, our shadows rested almost on top of each other, like two drawings overlaid and discovered to be the same design all along. And even later, when the day let go, and the night drew a thinner, kinder circle around us, I could still feel the echo of his fingers on mine. Choice, not chance. Steady as a heartbeat under the skin of a life that, at last, fit.